Thank you. I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the reasoning behind why we chose FAIR at TIAA and the things that we're doing with that. And I thought I'd leverage some of the slides I presented last year at RSA. I talked a little bit about some of the case studies, broadly the things that we're doing. But for our audience here today, focus really specifically on the FAIR aspect of that. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the broad organizational trends that were going on. This would have been 7 years ago. They sort of they kind of had it with high, medium, low, red, yellow, green kind of stuff, and they wanted to find another solution for this. But it wasn't the kind of thing that they wanted to do in part. They wanted the entire thing to be done quantitatively. So we had some unique things going on at the time. There was a whole management change in the security organization. So we had some opportunities to do some one-time uplift in staffing, and we were very small at the time, but we knew that this one-time uplift was going to be incremental only and then flat after that. We knew we had several large acquisitions on the horizon. This was done several years ago, so I can tell you we bought a bank, we bought an asset management company, so our staffing levels had to be consistent even after those acquisitions had happened. So whatever solution we came up with had to be able to scale really well with the staff that we had. This is the big one here, and I'll give you a little bit of update for those that may have saw the presentation last year about how this has evolved even then. But there was an operational risk framework that was growing up at the same time that the cyber risk framework was being developed. And as a result, there was a lot of pressure on just use our high, medium, low stuff and don't worry about the quantitative stuff. Bit of a spoiler, they're all off of that now. They're all onto the quant stuff now, which is really great. So it's been a very, very long, hard road to fight, but they're actually there now, so it's really good. The ones that left certainly made it easier. And then number 4, I think, is really kind of important. We had some regulatory pressure that was really pushing us towards granular risk assessments. They wanted to know, what are your highest risk applications? What are your highest risk server? What are your highest risk databases? What's your highest risk data transfer? Highest risk suppliers? And the organization wasn't content with just saying at a very high level, these are the scenarios that we find risky. They wanted to know that at the asset level, what we call resource level, a really granular component. So all these kind of things combined really pushed us towards building an overall framework, of which FAIR is the keystone too, that allowed us to sort of very articulately say, these are the risk and regulations that apply at an asset level. These are the control requirements that apply at that asset level. These are the risks that apply that we have to sort of think about allocating capital to prevent bad things from happening against. So those are where those kind of things came down to. And we really wanted to have this sort of rigor and justification for everything. And that's the word that I use a lot. When you think about integrating with existing organizational frameworks that have high, medium, low, and you have to pick one of those, what I always said, and these are little phrases and turns of phrase that I learned over years that helped me sort of integrate better with these organizations is, we comply with the overall framework, but we have a rigor around how we're choosing those things, and that rigor is using FAIR, and that's, and that gives us the backing to say and to assert positively that these are the way these things are. So this is really sort of the backdrop for where all these things came from and why we built it the way that we did. FAIR was a key component of that because it allowed us to justify those ratings, provide that rigor. Over time, we also, like Chris, sort of got into the model risk management function with this. So we had to build a lot of really interesting, it took us over a year. So I was really excited to hear that it only took you 6 months. So it was really, really kind of crazy. But what really came down to was when we began building these aggregate risk reports for board reporting and for all of our risk governance committees began seeing these kind of reports. I would say nobody asked for these things. We just sort of provided them. And a lot of what you do in quantitative risk management is you're providing products that nobody really knows are possible yet, right? And I think the FAIR Institute has gone a long way in changing that. But when you do this, you start to get attention of people and start saying, okay, so here's things that we're going to do. And we use this slide in particular to really kind of highlight things that were out of appetite. I was very fortunate to be able to get a quantitative risk appetite statement added into the enterprise statement, and I started managing to that. And the way that I went about it is I picked some ranges. Just sort of picked them. I just dropped some verticals here, and I said, well, here's a couple ranges of things. What do you guys like? And what we began doing is we started going through the various governance committees was people would look at this and say, yeah, okay, you know, $1 million, that's okay, or $2 million, or $5 million, and they would sort of try it on for size mentally. There's a lot of qualitative aspects to getting a good risk appetite statement. I have no idea what Jack's going to talk about later today, so I don't know if what I'm saying is heretical to any of that, but I guess we'll see, right? But this is how we went about it. It was very successful for us because it allowed us to sort of target the percentage of things and the number of applications that we really focused on. This is a really big theme in our organization is what are the top things to work on? We have lots of really clever phrases like the big rocks that we have to work on, like things like that. So you know, what are the top things we have to work on? And of all the really critical things, what are the most critical things we have to work on? So those are problem spaces that we're trying to solve, and FAIR is critical in doing that. But when you start showing boards and governance committees these kinds of things, you definitely get the attention of model risk management, and they want you to sort of validate these things. So, and that's why we went through this process. What I can tell you is that the people that they bring in to do this, and in our case we hired an external group to do this for us, they're very familiar with these methods. They're common, they're in use throughout the industry in lots of different kinds of ways. In our experience, they weren't familiar with applying them to the cyber risk space. That's where the FAIR Institute is unique in doing that. But walking them through that methodology was pretty straightforward because they were familiar with a lot of the terms, a lot of the use cases that we're using for. SME estimates are all over the place in very sophisticated quantitative models, so that wasn't foreign to them. I think it's sometimes we trip over ourselves in cybersecurity thinking that we have to have these really quantified, data-driven kind of things, but the reality is SME estimates work really well most of the time, and the places where they don't, we typically have some pretty good data to do that with. So that worked really, really well. The update that I'll share with you is that this is relatively recently. There has been some top-down organizational pressure to say, let's just go ahead and find some good quantitative models for all the organization. And through some different turns of phrase and different connections, and people talked to somebody on my team. One of the guys that works for me named Gary was talking to somebody, and he's like, hey, yeah, we're really trying to find a quant model for cyber. What do you think? And Gary said, yeah, I think we got that wrapped up for you here. So, so I had the opportunity to present to them about that, and one of the things that they were really impressed with was that what they were conceiving would be a good way to go about doing this for all of operational risk. The phrase they used was that, well, this is what we have with FAIR is very much like a credit or financial risk model, and we're just going to do that because that's far more sophisticated than we thought we could pull off anyway. So I think that speaks volumes about the benefit that FAIR can bring to your organization and the benefit that you as security leaders can have getting a seat at the table alongside the other parts of the business that are already driving value through very sophisticated modeling. So FAIR does a really good job of doing that. So 3 things, real short stuff. Look for the quick wins. So where I am now is 7 years into a journey, and where I was when I started was very, very different. So those beginning wins were really simple things like security exceptions, purchase decisions, control decisions. Should I do X, Y, or Z? Building plots and showing you here's the options and a couple slides to put some things together. Those are very, very effective to doing that. Over time, looking for better opportunities to grow and embed that in a lot of the decision making that the organization was happening. I would always say things like, well, if we want to be consistent in the way that we're making these decisions, we have to use the same model underlying all of it. Otherwise, we can't ensure that there's consistency between what one part of the company is saying and the other part saying when it comes to our cyber assessments. So that was really valuable in growing that slowly over time. Things like building it into Archer. Practice-wise, you have to make sure staff is trained and understood and understand the terminology that FAIR uses. It's slightly different than what a lot of security teams have, so I always sort of spend some time with a little bit of education when new people come on board to make sure they're all familiar with that. And there's lots of good resources that the FAIR Institute has for training and getting people up to speed on how to use that terminology, how to apply the model for some decision making. Steve mentioned that kind of thing too, where you don't always have to do all the quant stuff. Just simply looking at it as a function of these 2 things really is helpful that way, so that's always good. I think the integration with the organization, like I talked about earlier, is really helpful. Anytime that you're asked to rate something on an existing enterprise scale, applying that discipline and that rigor of FAIR to the same scenario to come up with that same rating is good. We had some, it was not all beer and Skittles, as they like to say. There were some troubles along the way, and you have to learn a little bit of how to sort of think and talk like a quantitative risk assessment person. So when a lot of times there was arguments around, well, gee, I don't know that this is the right model for this. And I said, well, what's the model everybody else is using to pick from high, medium, low? And the answer is they weren't. They were just sort of using their unaided mental model to pick something. So my argument back was always, well, when these other people are building a better model than that, then we can have a conversation. But for now, we're going to use this because it's rigorous, it's vetted, and what the benefit you might have starting out on this journey now that I didn't have years ago was that there's a lot more industry investment in FAIR now than there was a decade ago. So we have major standards bodies, we have major institutions investing in it and using it for the things that they're doing, and those are always very valuable in trying to justify to organizations that we should also do this. So kudos to the FAIR FAIR Institute for their win today. I think I spent a lot of time volunteering with ISACA, and I agree. I think the impact that the FAIR Institute has had on the industry is phenomenal and without equal. So congratulations to them. So that's my three things, right? Thank you.